that carried. Now we come to item number 13, which is the item that we had two presentations on this morning. And just to acknowledge the message I got that Joe Knight is still on the line. So Joe, this is just so you can hear the proceedings. This is not the area for participation in it, but thank you for being so patient, and thank you for your presentation again this morning. I'm going to, first of all, just get this to be moved and seconded. Maybe Councillor Hills and Councillor Darby would like to move and second that. We have been well briefed on that now, but we have Philippa Carroll, Pip, and Yusuf Khan as our officers here. So Pip, is there anything that you want to mention by way of introduction before we proceed to questions and comments?
Oh, Marina, Your Worship and Councillors, thank you for your time. I think Joe Knight and John Gillen covered off most things. We also presented other options to the local board, which didn't really go down that well. One was to divest the land, but 3 of the 4 land parcels at Ross Reserve are Crown owned, demolish the building. And we did get a full building assessment done and detailed costings, but when it came in at over $650,000, that was no longer an option due to constraints in the budget. And also just to acknowledge Joe Knight from Pēswiri Kaipāriki, when we went out to an expressions of interest, they submitted a very comprehensive application that came with detailed project plans and costings, which was also to be covered by voluntary professional hours and materials. And as you can see, Kaipāriki Local Board then granted an agreement to lease and lease with the gifting of the building. Staff also support the local board's recommendation to gift the building because under our current guidelines, a tenant-owned building is entitled to a 10 plus 10 year lease as opposed to a 5 plus 5, which is a council-owned building. And we feel that Pēswiri Kaipāriki's effort and work to bring the building up to standard is fair that they get a 20-year lease. And as echoed by Joe this morning, it's easy for them to get sponsorship and funding if the building is owned. And from council's viewpoint, it helps us to build relationships that are more reflective of being a partnership with local boards and local communities. And also, just from a purely monetary point of view, this will stop any future liabilities for council, as if we own the building, we are still liable for maintenance and ongoing costs. And also just to note that council definitely support the inclusion of point B, and this just helps clarify the situation, which will also be reflected in the legal documentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pip. And I've, as chair, I've accepted the amendment that has been moved by a councillor on B, which just reinforces your point. Not that there was any expectation, I think, given from the Pēswiri Kaipāriki group, but as a precedent for the future, if there's any other transfers, I think it's a good principle to build in. So I've got a number. I'll do questions first, and I've got a number. The first is from Councillor John Watson.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. And this is one that just really arises out of the commentary around point 17 in terms of compensation for improvements to the club, and it's very clear, of course, that there is none. But what I was keen to find out was, going back to 2019, what the status of the Glenfield Bowling Club membership was at that time, and I guess their sense of what it meant, basically giving up this this facility that they'd founded themselves, put a very substantial building on. Was that all quite amicable and a matter of course, or was there any residual kind of attempt or concern that they might keep going? What was the history to that point in 2019?
Hi. Yeah, the club had wound down to about 10 or 12 members, and the president of the time was very helpful and lovely, and he was there was no animosity. They were really good in helping us get the building ready, as was New Zealand Bowls to sell on. The members dispersed to other bowling clubs. No, I kind of got to meet them about 2018, and it was all very mutual and amicable, and they were all very helpful. And they just realised that the club had just sort of run its course, and just acknowledged that with all the opening of the new retirement villages, they also have bowling facilities in them. And yeah, but no, there was definitely no animosity from our side or theirs that I'm aware of.
Okay.
They were very helpful.
Good, thank you. That's good to hear. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I just would note that 40 years ago, when I was first elected in Parliament, the bowling clubs and the RSAs were the most important institutes in the community, and both for reasons of ageing population have kind of faded away, which is sad in its own right, but that reflects just a change in what people's interests and preferences are for. But good to hear that that was all done amicably. Next question is Councillor Pipacoom.
Oh, thank you. And very, very keen to support this. I just think it's fantastic to see what's come together and the opportunity that's here, and the community getting behind this with the local board. Yes, just really fantastic project. My partai is sort of looking at the bigger picture and is perhaps directed to the chief executive, and whether there's a learning for us in terms of council getting out of the way and tapping into the resources of the community, and whether this is perhaps a template for looking at other projects that might be on the books that have stalled because there isn't the funding or might need to be deferred. And as an example of that partnership, perhaps if there isn't a response now, putting on the spot, but I do feel that this really is an example of what is possible when council does get out of the way, and no doubt the final cost of a big restoration would be a lot more than almost $600,000, but just the opportunity too for sponsorship and co-funding.
Oh yeah, thanks for the question, Councillor Coombe. And I note the comments you made in the meeting the other day, consistent with the question that you asked. And I agree that there's potential for this as a template for other situations that are similar. That said, I think every situation would need to be evaluated on its own merits with respect to the property, its condition, the options for dealing with it. But this sort of arrangement, I'm sure, should be considered as an option where circumstances would allow. So I'll be making sure that that is fed back through our community facilities team.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive, and just best wishes to the Pest-Free Kaipātiki team taking on this big restoration work. Fantastic to see. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor. The last question I've got is from Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. So my question and comment just follows right on from Councillor Coombe. I think that it's a critical requirement for us to change the template, because if things have tracked according to the officer advice, this building would have been demolished at some cost and a huge opportunity lost. In this instance, we have an opportunity to, one, retain a building, but two, to acknowledge the phenomenal work that this particular group is doing that would otherwise be paid for by council, probably saving us hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. So there's a really critical need to alter the circumstance here. And my question that goes to this further is, we had a workshop, I think it was just yesterday, around the consideration of leases for community organisations and rentals. And part of that was around propositions to increase the charges to community groups. I think that this particular example here indicates that a peppercorn rental is entirely appropriate. And in fact, we should actually be giving them money, but we're not. So I have a question around how this relates to the process that's underway around consideration of rentals and leases, and obviously the related point around the necessity to change our policy in this area. Thank you.
Yeah, would somebody like to answer that question?
Perhaps. Yes, sorry, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to respond to that.
The Chief Executive is one of our officers, so please go ahead.
Yes, thanks, Councillor. A little bit in line with my question, my response to Councillor Coombe. I think, it's not possible for me to give a kind of a global response to say that in every circumstance we will find a solution that's just like this. But what I could say is that we will make sure that when we are faced with circumstances such as this, we will look for opportunities that include this kind of option as an outcome. Again, I couldn't give an undertaking that we'll always find one, but I think it's worth reflecting on this model and the extent to which it's successful in these circumstances, and looking to make sure that this option is evaluated when similar circumstances prevail in the future.
Thank you very much for that. So we come now to comments. First comment from Councillor Richard Hills.
And kia ora, and thank you all again, and thanks to the officers for not only this report but all the work that's gone into this over the last, I think it's about a year. And obviously thank you so much to the local board, Kaipatiki local board, John Gillen and team, for backing PFK, and for Joe Knight and the team. Pest-free Kaipatiki started through the Kaipatiki Restoration Group that I think started in 2009-ish. It was a small group, including Joe Knight, of very keen volunteers. We used to meet in the Northcote War Memorial Hall on cold nights with soup and other things with the Kaipatiki Community Facilities Trust, and it was all about doing as much mahi on the ground as possible, but with small numbers and big vision. In 2015, they pushed hard to create Pest-free Kaipatiki, worked with us when I was on the Kaipatiki local board, and have continued to grow and grow and grow. And from that small number of volunteers is now right across Kaipatiki with hundreds of volunteers, halos in almost every community, working in 160 reserves. Is just phenomenal, the amount of work that's done. We do help support them with regional funding. The Kaipatiki local board also give them quite a decent amount of funding as well, and they get funding from Birkenhead Licensing Trust and many other ways. But they use that for what they do. It's quite a small amount of funding in the end of the day compared to the amount of work they do. So that those thousands of volunteer hours every year and everything, the value they're putting into our parks and reserves, we couldn't actually do on council funding through our contracts. We just couldn't get that amount of work done. So this will step up another massive amount for our community and support communities around the shore in Auckland as well, and will help continue to bring the birds back, get rid of weeds, get rid of rats and stoats and everything else that we experience across Tamaki Makaurau, and it's just phenomenal work, and it's part of the many groups that have popped up over the last decade or so across Auckland. So it's just fantastic work, and what we have put there in B, it's acknowledging that as a council, and we're seeing it now again with COVID, we just do not have the funding for those extra renewals. We cannot take on these old buildings and continue to have that liability for the region. So Chris and I and the local board are very supportive of Pest-free Kaipatiki taking over this building, but also working as they've done already in innovative ways to get that funding, to get that support, but not rely continually on the ratepayer, because we already know that our current council buildings are in much need of that renewal funding. So I think this is a good deal for the community and a good deal for us, and just want to hope that everyone supports this. But yeah, fantastic work by all, and thank you very much. And I'm sure we will all be there for the first stage of the opening after after the team have got it upgraded, and all that volunteer work and continual restoration work will continue along while the site is being used in a much better way. And thank you for the comments about the bowling club. It was very amicable, and it's been done in a very good, positive, constructive way as well. Those members knew that it was time to move to other clubs and have the better use for the space. That wasn't just for 10 to 20 members, as we've seen in many bowling clubs across Auckland that can happen. So I want to thank them as well. And there's a really positive history there that I'm sure Pēswhiri Kaipātaki will continue to celebrate as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hills. So Councillor Christabi.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Hills has covered most points really well, but I do want to acknowledge Pēswhiri Kaipātaki and Joe Knight helming that organisation. Also John Gillen and the Kaipātaki Local Board for shepherding this through. Working an issue through like this where you're staring at a massive liability and coming out the other side with just a really good outcome is fantastic. So hats off to the board and Pēswhiri Kaipātaki for this, along with our staff also for, having the willingness to, look towards a really good outcome. So Pēswhiri Kaipātaki today, they've confirmed that they're not here, with coming cap in hand. They've got great commercial relationships already in place, and it's just so refreshing to see that. And John Gillen and I witnessed that at a recent planting where Pēswhiri Kaipātaki were leading the day, and Naylor Love, a big construction company here on the North Shore, operating right throughout New Zealand, were manning the barbies and contributing, and as were other companies as well. So good outcome here, and I would say the birds of Birkenhead, Birkdale, Northcote, Glenfield, etc. will be singing praise of this one. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor John Watson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor, and I'll be quick, but I think what's transpired here this morning is of sufficiently positive significance to merit a few comments, and I'm happy to do that. In the first instance, in respect of Pēswhiri Kaipātaki, whose influence goes way beyond just the confines of Kaipātaki or the North Shore. They go over to the Albany ward as well, so they do a huge amount of work. And when I saw that visual of the people crammed into the little room there, then what clearly more space is going to make a very significant difference for the ability of their work to expand beyond what they're even doing now in that immediate area that we saw. As far as building on community assets, and I regard the Old Glenfield Bowling Club as a community asset, what is particularly pleasing from my point of view is the manner now in which it's reinventing itself. So it served what was, a new suburb, Glenfield in the 1960s, one of the first new suburbs on the North Shore of the Nappy Valley, I think they used to call it. Now it's finding its way as a use for an environmental centre for the considerably, not just the local community, but particularly the schools, the young people that live in the area, which it is very well positioned for. So this is an excellent location in terms of centrality, not just for Glenfield, but for those other surrounding suburbs. So it's very easily accessible. In this respect, I'm very impressed by the leadership of the Kaipātaki local board here, who have saw an opportunity, have been reasonably adamant in terms of their own view of how this space could be best used going forward, and credit to the officers that they obviously have seen that possibility and have been willing to advance that. The net result of this is quite distinct from other instances where I know in my own ward where buildings have been destroyed, just the bulldozers put over them, and they've been left vacant for years and years. In this instance, we have a group that's doing a lot of work, which has secured what appears on the face of it to be some pretty substantial investment, and probably will proceed at a pace that's in excess of what is normally the case in terms of building and planning and all the the due diligence that gets done. So I just think, and Councillor Walker made this point, as a blueprint for the future, this is an excellent example. It's uplifting. It provides not just for the immediate future, but for the long-term future. So we're now 2020. The community's had the best part of 70 years use of this facility for recreational pursuit. Going forward, who knows what length of time we're going to have now for any number of environmental benefits, and if ever there's a time for considering the environment, it's now. So I genuinely take my hat off to all those people concerned, in particular Pest Free Kaipatiki and the Kaipatiki Local Board. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and just some brief words from me. I think this is the right solution from a community point of view, and the value that the Pest Free Kaipatiki Restoration Society clearly is adding to its community and its ability to build those coalitions with the private sector and with council. So I congratulate them on the work that they've done. I congratulate the local board on seeing the opportunity that exists there. I do note the qualification by our chief executive and agree with that it won't be a case of this being the solution every time. Sometimes when we have community facilities that are derelict, the answer will be to demolish them and to sell the property. But in this case, there was an exceptionally strong argument that the best way forward financially and the best way forward from the community's perspective was to do what these recommendations actually achieve. I think that we'll get great value out of the buildings through their use by Pest Free Kaipatiki, and it means that effectively the council has been saved $150,000 in demolition costs for a piece of land that I think is very suitable for the purpose for which it will now be put. So once again, to Jo, if she's still on the line, I think she will be, congratulations to you and all of your members. If you can pass on our thanks as a council for the great work that you do on behalf of the community over on the shore in Kaipatiki. And it's now time to put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary, no.
Aye.
I declare that carried, and I think unanimously. Right, we come now to item number 14, and this is